Welcome to Templeton World Charity Foundation's webinar on our Listening and Learning in a Polarized World initiative, focusing on our request for proposals, where submissions are due January 24th, 2023. We'll begin with a brief overview of the initiative and this RFP and the process for submission, with a focus on what we're looking for and what we're not looking for. We'll reserve the bulk of the time to answer your questions. Please ask your questions at any point utilizing the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And when we're finished with our brief presentation, we'll be sure to answer all of your questions. So with that, we'll start the presentation. First, I'll say a few words about Templeton World Charity Foundation, our core values, and perhaps a bit about how they relate to this request for proposals. First of all, we seek a global perspective. You can see from the design of this work, we are seeking out voices and ideas from around the world with a real focus on geographic and cultural diversity. Very much related to this request and this initiative, we embrace differences. We value open-minded collaboration and a radical embrace of others who think differently. Based upon the foundational vision of our founder, Sir John Templeton, we also celebrate the spiritual dimension of human life, focusing on truth, meaning, and purpose central to human progress and flourishing. Through our work and your work, we hope to promote breakthrough discoveries. And we think like a startup, and how these relate is that we want to encourage taking risks for greater rewards. So don't feel you have to take the safe route. Let's take a bold and ambitious view of how we can move forward knowledge about polarization and depolarization. And in the end, we want to create positive impact for people, where this knowledge and then the tools and policies that follow will help individuals and those and communities live better, more purposeful lives. The initiative on listening and learning in a polarized world has as its goal support of research for new scientific discoveries that can help humans flourish in a world that's confronted with increasing polarization. Polarization is complex. There are a variety of definitions and scope. We start with a general view. We ask you in your proposal to state your specific definition and scope. We believe polarization is important because it can become a threat to flourishing when that polarization leads to hate, distrust, dehumanization, violence, and economic disruption. And these can get in the way of connecting those with opposing views, coming together to solve society's most pressing problems. And fundamentally, we believe that progress comes through competition, through listening, and through learning. So with this RFP, it's the first step in what we're currently viewing as a three-step process. One, starting with the first goal, which is the goal of this RFP, which is to understand the underlying mechanisms of polarization and depolarization with clear and measurable indicators of the mechanisms. That, of course, will be useful for the second stage, which will be another set of, we're expecting to be another set of grants, to then use this understanding and these measures to measure and map polarization between and within societies and cultures in a global context, and then to lead to fundamental research that informs culturally relevant polarization prevention and mitigating innovations. So I'll speak now a bit more about how do we view this first goal, and what are we looking for in this RFP, and what are we not looking for in the RFP. So again, the goal here is twofold. One, understand the underlying mechanisms of polarization and depolarization with clear and measurable indicators of the mechanisms. So here in this diagram, we try to answer the question, what's of interest, what's in scope, what's in the system of interest, what's in the box, and what's outside the box that interacts with what's internal to what the focus of the research should be on, but shouldn't be the primary focus. So in the box are individuals with their cognition, their emotion, their behavior, and of course with their biology and their neurobiology, and then their connections, their social connections to social networks. Of course, they're both affected by and then affect to create polarizing and depolarizing external forces. So what's in the box we're referring to as internal, and then what's outside the box, everything outside the box is external. And in particular, looking at the forces of promoting polarization or depolarization. And then you can see on the right-hand side, these then lead to states of polarization, which of course affect the individuals as well. So that's what the system is. And then what's the focus of this work? The focus of the work that we're looking for are models and measurements. Models are the theories of the underlying internal to this box, internal mechanisms, and then measurements, the associated indicators of underlying the internal mechanisms. So you have the theories of the mechanisms, internal mechanisms, and then the indicators of the internal mechanisms. So we're looking for you to have research that focuses on both the models and the associated measurements. So getting into the RFP, and again, what we're looking for and not looking for, we're looking to fund up to 12 projects that will advance the knowledge base for researchers seeking to measure and map polarization between and within societies and cultures. And again, the RFP closes on January 24th, so next week. So look forward to seeing and answering your questions to help you get there. So what are we looking for? So number one, we'd like to see a literature review that situates the proposal in relation to relevant conceptual and empirical work. Two, we'd like you to seek to either generate, modify, validate, or falsify one or more theoretical models of polarization through empirical work in 2 or more cultural contexts. So sort of breaking this apart, one question to answer is, does it have to be a new theory or new model? It doesn't have to be. You can generate one, but you can also modify it, validate it, or falsify it. And then secondly, we're expecting empirical work on the measurements in 2 or more cultural contexts. Third, this should be a theoretical model that focuses on the mechanisms of polarization at 1 or more of the levels of this internal system: biology, neuroscience, on the individual, cognitive, affective, or behavioral, or social networks. And again, in addition to that, there's got to be an integration of seeking to identify, develop, or rigorously evaluate measures of the proposed mechanisms at play. And we ask you to identify, we're trying to identify universal and culturally specific mechanisms of polarization. So speak to that as well. And provide a working definition. This is where, the definitions, we provide sort of a working, initial broad working definition, but in your work, what is your working definition and scope of what you are referring to as polarization, both for the model and the measurements? And Clarity is required to understand whether the models and the measurements are specific to the type of polarization of interest or applicable to polarization generally. And finally, you're required to utilize open research practices that are described in the application guidelines, and also to agree to participate in a collaborative research network with the researchers here as the core. So what are we not looking for? We're not looking for work that exclusively looks at polarizing behavior without a strong integration of theory and measurement. So again, a strong integration of theory and measurement is really the core of the work that we're looking for. The proposals may focus on a specific polarization issue, but the primary research objective needs to be targeted to achieve an integrated understanding of the models and the measurement. So, so work with the primary lens focused on a particular polarization issue or cultural difference in polarization without the fundamental understanding of models is not of interest. And the primary focus of proposals should not be on the development of innovations or creating resources or platforms to spread awareness of innovations. Of course, they may be and eventually will be viewed as a secondary goal, but in this work, the resources, platforms, and innovations are not the focus. And we ask that proposals not explicitly aim to promote one side of a polarized topic. So with that, we'll move now to the process, and I'll hand off to Virginia. Let's see.
I'm just trying to get my screen shared together.
You should be able to now.
Yes. Eric, would you mind continuing? It's not working properly for me.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay, great. Well, we'll continue with the screen share. If you'd like, Virginia, you can go ahead and speak, and I'll share the screen.
Thank you. Yeah. So we do have extra requirements around open sharing and collaboration. And the reason that we do this for 3 reasons. 1, to accelerate discovery. We believe that if you make your data and your research freely available, it'll advance scientific discovery for everyone, to increase equity and to learn. So Eric, you can go to the next slide.
Sure.
And so how we plan on doing this, during the application process, we ask you to tell us about how you plan on sharing the research outputs. Tell us about your experience with open activities. Tell us about your past collaborative projects, as well as if the proposal is down selected, we will require you to pre-register your research project. Then lastly, we'll ask you to actively engage in the process and provide constructive feedback. So if your grant is selected, we don't want to just be prescriptive. We want to have your opinions and for you guys to tell us if this is working or what's not working. During the active grant stage, we will require you to publicly share and make your data and publication software, everything open. We will encourage you to post preprints and share your lab and field resources if possible. Share your pre-registration amongst the cohort. Share your project outputs, as well as, again, engage in the process and provide feedback to us. Next slide. So just to talk about the process, we're now in stage 1, which is we issued the request for proposals, and you guys are now completing your applications. Stage 2 happens after the proposal closes next week, and that's when we'll do a completeness check to make sure that all of the applications have been submitted successfully and completely, and we will do our internal review to check for fit for donor intent, Then the third stage is that it goes out for external review and a partial audit. So the external review will actually be double blinded, which is why in the instructions we ask you to not include anything that identifies you in your project description. And then after the conferral part of the review, we'll get the scores back and we will do a partial lottery. Fourth will be the response to reviews. So we will, after we've down selected through the partial lottery, you will have, we will give our down selected applicants a chance to respond to the reviewer comments. So in this stage, you're allowed to respond to what they've said, as well as incorporate any useful feedback that you think they may have provided. From there, a funding decision is made. At this point, it's no longer competitive. So anybody who has made it through and is down selected, now you go and you're not competing with anybody else for funding. It goes to our board of trustees, who looks at it for cost effectiveness and fit to donor intent. And then after that, you will have to do the pre-registration, which you will have a webinar to help with the pre-registration process. Next slide. So here it is. You hopefully would have been familiar with this by now. If not, this is what our portal looks like. So when you click the link on our webpage, it will take you to this. You fill out this user profile information, and within a day, you will get access to your grant proposal form. So once you, next slide. Also linked there is our request for proposals document. So this is our guidance document. It answers the majority of the questions that you may have about the proposal. We ask that you review this carefully, because it will help you to build a strong application. Next slide. Yeah, so once you've had access to the proposal, this is the portal that you gain access to, and this is what it looks like. So first, next slide, Eric. There are two things I want to point out. First is organizations. So if your organization has not previously been awarded a grant from TWCF, it will land in draft stage. You would need to complete the organizations form and submit it. Any grant that does not have an organization submitted with the proposal, unfortunately, does not meet our completeness check. So I would recommend that you please make sure that you submit your organization if needed. The second one I would circle is drafts. That's where you would find your application. You can have more than one application. So how many ever you have, you'll have one in draft, you can have one submitted. How many ever you submit, you will find them all in the drafts and need to move them to submitted if you plan on submitting that one. Next, we want to point out quickly the budget. So you will have to actually, there's a link on the form, you download the budget template and you complete the budget template. It's a rather simple budget template. We just ask you to have a bit of a narrative to explain any amounts over $10,000. And if you have any additional funding, we ask for a short narrative about that as well. Next slide. Yeah, so these are the questions. These are also found in the application guidance document to help you, but this, we were trying to be very transparent on how we make our decisions. So these questions are what are in the completeness check. And if any of these are missing, it would qualify as not a complete application. So next. Stage two would be the internal review. So in here, we go a bit more in depth into what we're looking for before it goes into external review. So this is mostly just looking at compliance and like the common sense checks to make sure that it is appropriate to go out to external review. Next is the external review. So the external reviewers, which will be peers and experts in the field based on what your proposal is in. So if it's in political science, we'll have political scientists reviewing it. If it's in economics, you'll have economics reviewing it. Economists reviewing it. If it's in psychology, it'll be psychologists reviewing it, and so forth. They will be looking for the potential for impact, innovation, study design and methods, overall quality. And then afterwards, there will be a conferral where the reviewers can see other reviewers' comments and have a period where they can respond to other reviewers before you get back all of that. Both the responses of the reviews and a bit of the conferral. Then on the next stage, it's a cutoff. So Anything above the cutoff will be randomly selected by a partial lottery, and anything below the cutoff, unfortunately, will be rejected. Then next is the pre-registration and funding decision. So this is where you get the opportunity to respond to reviewers and their comments. You can, like I said, you can either incorporate some of them, or you can address the concerns if you feel as if the reviewer misunderstood what you were saying. This is your opportunity to respond and defend and strengthen your proposal. Again, the funding decision will be made by the trustees of TWCF. They will be looking for fit to donor intent and cost effectiveness. And pre-registration will happen, and a pre-registration agreement will be signed before we sign the grant agreement. And the registration can be for hypothesis testing or exploratory research. And next slide. So this is the timeline. We're currently at January 18th, which is what this webinar is for the last minute questions. The deadline is next week, the 24th. The announcements to finalists will be mid to late April. The announcement of awards will be late June. And the project description can be 12 to 24 months. Also, one thing to note is that we ask you to not just attach your project description. So it is a little annoying, but we will need you to copy and paste into the project description form as well, because the way we export the data and information, it is from the form. And so we do ask you to not just attach a project description document. Next slide. And I think that's it. We can go and open up for any questions that may have. I see we have a few in the Q&A now. Eric, you can go ahead and start answering live. Kristen and I can probably also just answer questions by typing any easy questions that we see.
Yeah, no, thank you, Virginia. And you should be able to turn your video on now at this point, if you'd like. Great. So, yeah, thank you again for your interest. And I see we have a number of questions. And I will do my best to answer some of them and offer to Virginia to answer others. So I don't believe there is a template for submitting proposals. There is, as Virginia mentioned, when you log into the system, you'll see that there are, fields to enter your project description, and so there isn't significant amount of templating there, but there are questions to be answered and fields to be filled out, as well as the budget itself. As Virginia shared, there is a template that you need to fill out. So hopefully those are the answers. Those answer your questions regarding the template. Let's see, in terms of a preferred format for the bibliography, I don't believe that we have a preferred format. Virginia, please correct me if I'm missing that. So let's see. One of the most popular questions we've been receiving has to do with word counts for each section. So Virginia, I know you've been answering that question. If you might want to share word count requirements for each section, and also advice as to what should be input for each area. Please go ahead.
So there actually is no hard word limits. For a grant of this size, we usually have project descriptions between 4 and 10 pages. The references do not count towards the page limit. For the executive summary and donor intent sections, we ask you to have no more than 350 words. I did have a question somebody asked about the outputs and outcomes. There isn't really a hard limit on those, but the deliverables should only be a sentence or two. That's it.
Great, thank you, Virginia. And related to that, right, there's a question. So I'll just go down in order now. So there was a question about Polis, a platform, and I know we have heard about it, but I'm not sure it's necessarily pertinent to all proposals. Certainly, the question, the start date, could we start a project on 7/1/2023? And the answer is yes. I think that is the earliest date you could. No? Oh, go ahead.
No, we would not be able to start that early. We go into a process. So once you are, if you do get an award, you will be notified in late June. From there, you will get the award letter, but you cannot start the project until the grant is fully executed. For organizations that we've worked with before, sometimes that happens very quickly. We just send it, your grants office signs it and sends it back really fast, and you can start once the agreement is fully executed. But we do usually ask about 6 to 8 weeks just to be safe. So we would say for this, you would be looking at a late August start date would be what we would recommend. So maybe like September 1. All projects should start before December 15th.
Yeah, and again, my apology. For some reason, I saw 9/1, but yes, July 1st is too early, and the timeline that was presented, we suggested the earliest start date is September 1st. So thank you, Virginia. Let's see. Project description. So we already discussed the project description can be 10 pages max. And the question was, can we attach our project description as a PDF instead? And Virginia answered that question previously in that we need you to cut and paste into the field for project description as well.
You can also
go ahead.
add, you can add it as an attachment. So the full PDF, you can add it as an attachment as well, but we do need something aside from see attached document in the project description field.
Great. And the other question there is for attachments. Do we have formatting requirements in terms of font, spacing, margins, et cetera? And the answer is no. So let's see. Next question is in relation with the outcomes. The application guidance document refers that we must list only the most important indicators, no more than 2 outcomes that you can track and report to TWCF throughout the project. This means that we must list only 2 outcomes or only 2 indicators per outcome. And Virginia, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it would just be 2 outcomes. You can list more. They ask you to list short-term and long-term indicators, but only 2 outcomes, please.
Yeah, thank you. And a question about what time on January 24th is the proposal due? Do we have a set time on that where we're going to close the system?
11:59 p.m. PST. So a specific time at 11:59.
Great, thank you. Next question is, we're planning on testing across several Western demographies, which can vary in certain key respects. For example, the US is more individualistic than other European nations. However, we're not equipped to investigate in other countries. The question is, would the committee be open to this type of cross-cultural comparison? And for this state, yes. So the answer for this particular RFP, the requirement is just looking at 2 different cultures. So I believe the answer to your question is yes. When we broaden it in subsequent work, then it's going to need validity. And I think one of the questions, if your testing is just in 2, I'm wondering whether I don't think your question is referring to whether it will be applicable or generalizable to other cultures. If it's about testing, yeah, just 2 or more cross-cultural are fine. So thank you for that. The next question is, how should we treat references to our own work in the project description? As author, 2018, names removed, or with a named citation and reference. And, I think that is probably quite relevant to our process, where the external review will be a double-blind review. So Virginia or Kristen, would you like to add anything to that? I don't think you should say author, but I look forward to Virginia or Kristen if you have some comment on that.
Yeah, if you could if you reference your work, like I would say try to reference your work in a way that it's not clear that it's your work, if that makes sense. So instead of saying our previous work that showed this, maybe you can say previous work has shown this. So in a way that it references your work, but it doesn't necessarily show that you are referencing your work. It's like you're referencing the work of somebody else, just to try and keep it anonymous. Because even if you put our author and then you put it in the references, it's a quick search of the paper name or clicking on the DOI to find out who the author is. So if there's a way where you can just reference it but not as your own, almost, that can be helpful. Yeah, that's what I would say. Because again, the external reviewers are not looking at the capacity of the team to carry out the research. That's going to be done by internal staff that will see the full proposal and see your name.
Great, thank you, Virginia. Next question, if a project description contains equations or figures, is it acceptable to submit it as a PDF, or does it need to be able to be self-contained and understood from the text box alone? So I'll give a first answer, and Virginia can clarify if needed. So it should be understandable within the text box itself, but certainly certain things, if you need, say, a graphic or an image, you should, in the text box, refer to the attachment. But Virginia, would you like to clarify further?
Sure, like previously said, you can also add the full, so just copy and paste, but you can also add the full beautiful project description as an additional attachment. Again, we just don't want it to say in the project description, see attached document for project description. So you can also include that. You can also include the images as appendices, however you want to do it. We just do need it to be a little completely contained in the text box, but you can add as much addendums as you want.
Great, thank you. Next question. We're proposing a project that relies both on computational modeling, experimental design, as well as cross-national surveys. To show that it is a feasible project, would it be permitted to note in the project description that our core team has experience in these techniques, naturally without references of identifying marks? That is to show feasibility of specifying in-house expertise. Let's see. Yeah, I believe so. And Virginia, correct me if I'm wrong, there still will be a field I'm trying to remember if we included a field on capacity that doesn't go to the external reviewers, or whether we remove that field completely from the application.
I actually don't remember. I can't remember if the capacity of success field is on the bigger grants. Kristen, do you remember? I don't remember right now.
Yeah, there's no capacity for success on this type of project, but I think it goes back to Virginia's answer on the previous question, that the external reviewers won't be they won't be asked to judge you on capacity of success. That's something that's done internally. So I hope that answers that question as well a bit.
Great, so thank you. So yeah, again, the key is, when this is double-blinded, you don't want to, as you mentioned in your question, identify yourself through your comments about your capacity, and we don't ask that question. And and externally that isn't being reviewed. But certainly mentioning that there is, and there is capacity, and certainly that can probably be seen, and when you put your budget together, what sort of people are on the project. Great. So next question. We are proposing, let's say, a CV would be of the student or the principal investigator. Virginia, would you like to share which CVs are required?
Both. So you are required to submit CVs for every team member that is named. So you would need to have it for the student if the student is a known team member, as well as for the PI.
Great, thank you. Next question is, can the literature review be an attachment? I suppose, I mean, it can be, but if it is relevant to the proposal itself, you'll want to include at least some of it or a summary of it in your project description, if you want it to be viewed as part of your project and the rationale for the project. Next question. A previous correspondence indicated no word limit for portal sections, and that an extended project description is welcomed as an attachment. Did you share that those word limits have now changed to have a 350 word limit in the portal and a 10-page limit on the extended project description? So Virginia, if you want to.
Yeah, there are no hard word limits. We do have these as recommendations, especially around the executive summary and donor intent, but there are no hard word limits for the proposals.
Great, thank you. Next question. In the output section, do we just include the dependent variable name with definition and details of measure, or do you need anything more? Giving some thought to that question, I think in your if you describe it in more detail and its relationship to the theoretical model in your project description, you probably don't need more in the output section, but your project description should be very clear about which models you're testing and which measurements you're either proposing or evaluating, and how they are integrated and related and how they're being tested. So the output is less about what you're going to be finding. It's more about what tangible outputs will be coming from this, whether, if it is, a certain kind of test, a survey, a biological test, whatever kind of evaluation, if it's a protocol, if it's something physical, tangibly, what is the output? But describe more about what those measures are in the project description. Let's see, next question. In the output section, do we just include the dependent variable? Oh, sorry, that was the same question. Next question. Is it allowed to specify the study site and country? I believe that should be fine and important because it doesn't identify you, and the culture, the culture you're studying is important. Virginia, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think that's correct. You're allowed to specify the study site and country.
Great. Can the team members be from different institutions and have administrative functions over the project? My understanding is, first of all, there's the project director level, and you can have a co project director who can be from a different institution. But the institution needs, the primary project director and the institution that the grant would go towards have primary responsibility for the entire project. Anything else to add?
Yeah, in terms of reporting and signing the contract, but you can have sub awards and subcontracts that would be between the legal organization and the other institutions. So that's usually how that works.
Great, thanks. Next question, is there an advantage to listing team members beyond the PI as known team members, particularly students and postdocs? Or would this only make sense if they bring specific or unique expertise? And if a postdoc is named on the project, but moves on, for instance, to a new faculty position, would this become a concern?
It would not become a concern. The only time we ask you to really list known team members is if they're getting, if they're going to be funded from the project. So if they are going to be a part of the grant and they're getting more than $5,000, or they're devoting more than 10% of their time, and you know who that person is, you can't list it. If for some reason they do move on and you would like to hire a new postdoc, that is fine.
Great, thank you. So how strictly are you defining organization employees, project director, known team members, et cetera, for the letter of support requirements? Do people have to be full-time employees of the organization, or can they be counted as employees if they are on pre-existing contract with the organization, not solely for the proposed project, and therefore do not require a letter of support? So Virginia or Kristen, you know where we draw the line there?
Yes, so an employee is defined as somebody who gets their main salary and their benefits from that organization. If that is not the case with the person, then they're not considered employed by the legal organization. The letter of support does not have to come from their legal organization. The letter of support comes from the individual, just indicating their commitment to the project. So it's just a letter of support saying that they are aware of the project, they do 100% support the project, and they are happy to be in whatever capacity you're naming them as in the grant. So that's what the letter of support would be, and it would be required for people who are from other organizations.
Great, thank you, Virginia. And the last open question currently, in my proposal, the theoretical model for the underlying mechanism of polarization is expected to be generalizable across cultures. In this case, would it be okay to experimentally test the hypothesis in 2 different cultural contexts, expecting evidence for this assumption that this model would not be cultural dependent? Yeah, as long as you have empirical data, and it is, you don't see a difference between the different cultures, that's what you'll find in your experimental results. And it certainly, you're hypothesizing it, but it's the test that counts in the end. So yes, that would be okay. Good. So there are no more open questions. If what we just described or promoted some additional thoughts or questions, please do add them to the Q&A function. And if afterwards, if something comes to you after this this webinar, please email us at LLPW@templetonworldcharity.org, and we'll do our best to answer you directly. Really, thank you for your interest in becoming part of this RFP and this initiative. We've been very excited to see the response. So I think there's quite a bit of good work going on out there, and I'm sure your proposals are no exceptions to that. So we're really excited to read your proposal, but we understand that there's still, you know, there are many questions about how to shape the proposal and how to input the proposal. So we're here to support you in that. Virginia or Kristen, would you like to say anything else in parting?
Just thank you for your interest and thank you for your proposals. And of course, any questions, please feel free to email us.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We are so glad that you're here, and we look forward to reading your proposals. Again, Virginia put the email address in the chat, so we look forward to any questions or concerns that you have. We're available to answer. So thank you very much, and we will be communicating shortly. We look forward to seeing the proposals next week. Take care.